In some of the world's most perilous waters, divers and daredevils risk it all, only to face nature's apex predator. Sharks don't care why you're there. When they strike, it's swift, brutal, and unforgettable. In this video, we reveal 6 chilling encounters that spiraled into chaos and blood. From a thrill seeker devoured on camera to a river rescue ambushed by a bull shark, these are the moments when awe turned to horror. The waters off Gansby, South Africa, had earned their reputation as the great white shark capital of the world long before July 5, 2025. This stretch of the western Cape coastline, where the cold Atlantic meets the warmer Indian Ocean currents, created the perfect hunting ground for apex predators. The area's massive seal colonies on nearby Dyer Island had attracted great whites for centuries, turning these waters into a natural amphitheater of marine drama. Local fishing communities had passed down stories of enormous sharks for generations. Still, it was only in recent decades that thrill seekers and researchers began venturing into these dangerous waters with increasing frequency. Lucas Miller had first encountered the ocean's most feared predator 3 years earlier off the coast of Port Lincoln, Australia. The 28-year-old extreme sports enthusiast from Bavaria had been participating in an unauthorized cage-free dive when a 14-foot great white had attacked him, leaving deep gashes across his shoulder and back. The scars from that encounter served as both a warning and a badge of honor, and rather than deterring him, the attack had only intensified his obsession with these magnificent killing machines. By 2025, Miller had built a modest following on social media, documenting his increasingly dangerous stunts. His YouTube channel featured him base jumping from alpine peaks, free climbing sheer cliff faces, and swimming with various shark species around the globe. When a documentary production company approached him about filming the ultimate shark encounter, Miller knew exactly what he wanted to accomplish. He would return to the waters where great whites ruled supreme. Still, this time he would attempt something no one had ever successfully documented: swimming alongside a great white shark without any protective equipment, while maintaining proximity for an extended period. The production team had spent weeks coordinating with local boat operators and securing the necessary permits. Captain Hendrik Botha, a weathered Afrikaner who had been running shark diving expeditions for over 2 decades, expressed serious reservations about the planned stunt. He told the crew that in all his years on these waters, he had never seen anyone attempt such a reckless feat. The captain's concerns were echoed by marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been brought in as a safety consultant, but found herself increasingly uncomfortable with the production's cavalier attitude toward the inherent dangers. On the morning of July 5th, conditions appeared ideal for the attempt. The sea lay relatively calm under overcast skies, with water visibility extending to nearly 30 feet. The production boat anchored near a known great white hunting ground, roughly 2 miles southeast of Dyer Island. Within minutes of deploying their chum slick, the crew spotted the distinctive triangular dorsal fin of a massive great white circling their vessel. Marine mammal expert Jonas Kellerman estimated the shark's length at approximately 16 feet, making it one of the largest specimens he had ever observed in these waters. Miller suited up in a standard wetsuit, refusing all protective gear except for diving fins and a mask. He carried no shark deterrent devices, no protective cage, and no weapon of any kind. His plan involved entering the water slowly and maintaining calm, controlled movements while the cameras captured every moment of his interaction with the apex predator. The documentary crew positioned themselves both above and below the waterline, with underwater cameraman Yuki Tanaka following Miller's descent while remaining at what everyone hoped would be a safe distance. The initial minutes of the encounter proceeded exactly as Miller had envisioned. The great white approached with the calculated grace that had made these sharks successful hunters for millions of years. Miller floated motionless in the water column, his arms spread wide in a gesture of non-aggression, while the massive predator circled him at a distance of roughly 20 feet. The shark's behavior appeared curious rather than aggressive. For several minutes, the encounter bore a resemblance to the peaceful interactions Miller had experienced with other large marine predators in the past. However, experienced great white shark researchers knew that these sharks could transition from docile to explosive aggression in mere seconds. Dr. Chen later reported that she had observed subtle changes in the shark's body language approximately 30 seconds before the attack occurred. The great white's movements became more rigid and direct, its pectoral fins dropped lower, and its swimming pattern shifted from lazy circles to increasingly tight spirals around Miller's position. The attack happened with the lightning speed that made great whites such effective predators. Without warning, the shark accelerated from its circling pattern and struck Miller with tremendous force, its massive jaws clamping down on his torso just below the ribcage. Underwater cameras captured the horrifying moment as the shark's serrated teeth penetrated the wetsuit and bit deep into Miller's body cavity. Blood immediately clouded the water as Miller thrashed desperately, his hands beating against the shark's snout in a futile attempt to force a release. Captain Botha immediately gunned the boat's engines while crew members threw life preservers and shouted instructions that could not be heard beneath the surface. Tanaka, the underwater cameraman, found himself torn between his professional obligations and basic human survival instincts as he witnessed the attack unfolding just 20 feet away. He continued filming while simultaneously signaling frantically to the surface crew, his camera capturing footage that would later serve as crucial evidence in the investigation. The great white's attack continued for what seemed like an eternity, but according to the timestamps on the recovered footage, it lasted only 43 seconds. Miller's struggles grew weaker as the shark maintained its grip and began the characteristic thrashing motion that great whites use to tear chunks of flesh from their prey. When the shark finally released its hold, Miller's body floated motionless in the rapidly expanding cloud of blood, his wetsuit torn open and his injuries visible even through the murky water. Recovery efforts began immediately, with Captain Botha and 2 crew members diving into the shark-infested waters to retrieve Miller's unconscious form. The great white had disappeared back into the depths, apparently satisfied with its attack, though Dr. Chen noted that the blood in the water would likely attract additional predators within minutes. The rescue team managed to pull Miller aboard their vessel and began emergency first aid procedures, but his injuries were catastrophic and beyond the capabilities of their basic medical supplies. A medical helicopter evacuated Miller to Groot Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, where trauma surgeons worked for over 6 hours, attempting to repair the massive damage to his torso. Despite their efforts, Miller succumbed to his injuries 12 hours after the attack, having never regained consciousness. Marine biologists and safety experts subsequently used the documentary footage to study the behavior and attack patterns of great white sharks. However, the production company faced significant legal challenges from Miller's family regarding the circumstances surrounding his death. The incident sent shockwaves through the extreme sports community and prompted heated debates about the ethics of filming dangerous stunts involving wildlife. Captain Botha retired from shark diving operations shortly after the attack, stating that, in his opinion, some boundaries should never be crossed in humanity's relationship with the ocean's apex predators. The waters surrounding Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, carried decades of maritime history beneath their deceptively calm surface. In 2018, the area continued to serve as an active naval training ground, where submarines conducted routine exercises and divers performed regular maintenance operations. Lieutenant Jordan Hayes had served as a Navy diver for 8 years, completing over 300 underwater missions in locations ranging from the frigid waters of Alaska to the tropical seas of the Pacific. The 31-year-old from Oregon had earned commendations for his work in ship hull inspections, underwater welding, and equipment recovery operations. His expertise in deep-water salvage had made him an essential member of the Pacific Fleet's diving team, and he approached each mission with the methodical precision that had kept him safe throughout his military career. On September 14, 2018, Hayes received orders to retrieve sensitive sonar equipment from a decommissioned submarine that had been deliberately sunk 3 miles southwest of Pearl Harbor as part of a training exercise. The vessel, a retired nuclear submarine, rested at a depth of 85 feet on the sandy bottom, its hull providing shelter for various marine species that had quickly colonized the artificial reef. Intelligence reports indicated that several pieces of classified sonar buoys remained attached to the submarine's exterior, and Hayes's mission involved carefully removing these devices without damaging their internal components. The morning dive began routinely, with Hayes descending through crystal-clear water that offered visibility extending nearly 60 feet in all directions. His dive partner, Petty Officer Marcus Chen, remained stationed at the 30-foot mark to serve as a safety observer and maintain communication with the surface support vessel. Hayes carried standard Navy diving equipment, including a full-face mask with integrated communications, dual air supplies, and a complete toolkit for the equipment removal operation. Upon reaching the submarine's hull, Hayes immediately noticed the abundance of marine life that had taken up residence around the wreckage. Schools of tropical fish darted between the vessel's conning tower and periscope housing, while larger species, including barracuda and reef sharks, maintained a respectful distance from the diving operation. The sonar buoys were located along the submarine's port side, partially buried under accumulated sand and coral growth that had developed over the 18 months since the vessel's sinking. Hayes began the delicate process of extracting the first sonar device, using precision tools to cut through the securing cables without triggering any internal damage. The work required intense concentration as he maneuvered around protruding metal structures and navigated through confined spaces between the hull and the accumulated debris. His movements generated subtle vibrations that traveled through the water column, creating the type of low-frequency signals that predatory sharks often associated with distressed prey animals. The 12-foot tiger shark emerged from the submarine's interior without warning, having likely been resting within the vessel's spacious torpedo room before being disturbed by Hayes's activities. Tiger sharks, renowned for their opportunistic hunting behavior and powerful bite force, frequently investigate unfamiliar sounds and movements within their territory. This particular specimen displayed the characteristic dark stripes across its robust body and the broad, flattened head that gave these sharks their distinctive appearance and formidable reputation. Hayes first became aware of the shark's presence when he felt a sudden crushing pressure on his left forearm. The tiger shark had approached from his blind spot and clamped its massive jaws around his diving equipment and arm, apparently mistaking the combination of his wetsuit tools and movement patterns for a large, wounded fish. The shark's teeth, designed for cutting through turtle shells and bones, penetrated his neoprene suit and bit deep into the muscle and bone of his forearm. Trapped within the shark's grip and unable to reach his diving knife with his free hand, Hayes found himself in a desperate struggle for survival. The shark's bite force, estimated at over 400 pounds per square inch, had fractured bones in his arm and severed several tendons, causing excruciating pain and immediate loss of function. Blood began streaming from the wounds, creating a red cloud in the water that would likely attract additional predators within minutes. Drawing on his military training and survival instincts, Hayes began striking the shark's snout and gill slits with his free hand, targeting the sensitive areas that marine biologists had identified as effective deterrents during shark attacks. His blows, hampered by the water's resistance and his awkward position, initially seemed to have little effect on the powerful predator. However, after nearly 30 seconds of sustained attacks, the tiger shark finally released its grip and retreated toward the submarine's interior. Hayes immediately activated his emergency ascent procedures, inflating his buoyancy compensator and beginning a rapid but controlled rise to the surface. Petty Officer Chen, who had observed the attack from his position above, descended quickly to assist with the emergency ascent, while simultaneously alerting the surface support team. The ascent, which normally would have required several decompression stops, was completed in under 3 minutes due to the medical emergency. The surface support crew had already prepared emergency medical equipment by the time Hayes reached the boat, and they immediately began treating his severe injuries while racing toward the nearest naval medical facility. Military medics applied pressure bandages and administered pain medication during the high-speed transit to an Army medical center, where orthopedic surgeons worked to repair the extensive damage to Hayes's arm. The surgical team spent over 4 hours reconstructing Hayes's forearm, repairing fractured bones, reattaching severed tendons, and addressing nerve damage that would require months of physical therapy. While Hayes ultimately retained full use of his arm, the incident prompted a comprehensive review of Navy diving procedures in areas known to harbor large predatory sharks, including mandatory sonar sweeps before diving operations and revised safety protocols for working near underwater structures that could shelter dangerous marine life. False Bay, located on the eastern side of the Cape Peninsula near Cape Town, South Africa, had long been recognized as one of the world's premier locations for marine wildlife photography. In 2019, the bay's clear waters and abundant seal colonies continued to attract both great white sharks and adventurous photographers seeking dramatic underwater imagery. The area's unique geography, where warm Indian Ocean currents mixed with colder Atlantic waters created an ecosystem that supported diverse marine life while providing the crystal-clear visibility that underwater photographers prized above all else. Fashion photographer Lisa Grant had built her reputation, capturing ethereal underwater images that blurred the line between fashion and fine art. The 34-year-old London native had spent the previous decade perfecting techniques for shooting models in aquatic environments, from controlled swimming pools to challenging ocean locations around the Mediterranean. Her portfolio featured flowing fabrics that moved like liquid sculpture beneath the surface, creating dreamlike compositions that had earned her recognition in major fashion publications across Europe. Grant's latest project involved collaborating with Cape Town-based model Zara Okonkwo to create a series of images that would showcase both the beauty of South Africa's marine environment and cutting-edge underwater fashion photography techniques. The concept centered on Okonkwo floating gracefully among kelp forests while wearing specially designed, flowing fabrics that created stunning visual effects as they moved through the water. Grant had spent months planning the logistics, coordinating with local dive operators, and designing waterproof lighting systems that could illuminate her subjects without disturbing the delicate marine ecosystem. On November 23, 2019, conditions appeared perfect for the ambitious photo shoot. The morning brought calm seas and exceptional underwater visibility, extending over 40 feet, allowing Grant's team to set up their equipment near a thriving kelp forest approximately 2 miles offshore from Seal Island. The production crew included dive safety coordinator Willem van der Merwe, underwater lighting specialist Antonio Rodriguez, and assistant photographer Kenji Nakamura, who would capture behind-the-scenes footage of the elaborate setup process. Okonkwo, an experienced freediver who had worked on several previous underwater fashion shoots, descended gracefully into the kelp forest wearing flowing white and silver fabrics that billowed dramatically as she moved through the water column. Grant positioned herself 15 feet away with her specially modified underwater camera system, capturing images of the model as she posed among the swaying kelp fronds and interacted with curious seals that approached to investigate the unusual activity in their territory. The nearby seal colony, consisting of several hundred Cape fur seals, provided both an enchanting backdrop for the photo shoot and an unfortunate attractant for the area's apex predator population. Marine biologists had documented regular great white shark activity in these waters, particularly during the seal pupping season, when young, inexperienced seals became easy targets for hungry predators. The production team had consulted with local shark experts before the shoot and was assured that morning hours typically represented the safest time for underwater activities. The 18-foot great white shark approached the photo shoot location with the stealth that had made these predators successful hunters for millions of years. The combination of seal activity, unusual lighting equipment, and human movement patterns had likely triggered the shark's predatory instincts, causing it to investigate what appeared to be a gathering of potential prey animals. Grant later reported that she had noticed unusual behavior among the seals approximately 2 minutes before the attack, as several animals suddenly fled the area despite showing no previous signs of distress. The attack occurred with devastating speed as Okonkwo stood poised near the edge of the kelp forest, her flowing fabrics creating striking silhouettes against the filtered sunlight streaming down from the surface. The great white burst upward from the deeper water below, its massive jaws opened wide as it targeted what it perceived as an injured seal floating near the surface. The shark's teeth closed around Okonkwo's left calf, penetrating both her wetsuit and the decorative fabric while delivering a crushing bite that fractured bones and severed muscle tissue. Grant, positioned directly in front of the attack, captured the horrifying moment through her camera viewfinder before dropping her equipment and swimming frantically toward her injured model. Okonkwo thrashed desperately in the shark's grip, her training as a freediver allowing her to maintain enough composure to avoid inhaling water despite the excruciating pain. The great white maintained its hold for nearly 20 seconds, shaking its head violently in the characteristic manner that these predators use to disorient and weaken their prey. Van der Merwe, the dive safety coordinator, had positioned himself above the main shooting area specifically to watch for potential dangers. Upon witnessing the attack, he immediately deployed an emergency shark deterrent device, while simultaneously signaling for the surface support team to prepare for an emergency medical evacuation. His quick actions, combined with Okonkwo's desperate struggles, apparently convinced the great white to release its grip and retreat toward the deeper waters surrounding the kelp forest. The ascent to the surface became a race against time, as blood from Okonkwo's wounds attracted several smaller shark species to the area. Rodriguez and Nakamura formed a protective circle around the injured model. At the same time, Grant and van der Merwe guided her toward the surface, monitoring her condition for signs of shock or blood loss that could prove fatal before medical help arrived. The entire rescue operation, from the initial attack to reaching the surface, took less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours to everyone involved. Emergency medical personnel were already standing by aboard the support vessel, having been alerted by van der Merwe's surface signals during the ascent. They immediately began treating Okonkwo's severe injuries, while the boat raced toward Cape Town's harbor at maximum speed. Paramedics applied pressure bandages and administered pain medication during the 20-minute transit, working to stabilize her condition before transfer to a trauma center equipped to handle complex bite wounds. Surgeons at the hospital in Groot Schuur spent over 5 hours repairing the damage to Okonkwo's calf, reconstructing torn muscle tissue, setting fractured bones, and addressing potential nerve damage that could affect her long-term mobility. While she eventually made a full recovery after months of physical therapy, the incident effectively ended her career as an underwater model. It prompted significant changes to safety protocols for fashion photography in waters where sharks are present. The attack footage, captured inadvertently by Grant's automatic camera system, later provided valuable research data for marine biologists studying great white shark behavior and attack patterns. However, the images from what was intended to be a celebration of underwater beauty instead served as a sobering reminder of the inherent dangers present in the ocean's most pristine environments. The waters off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, earned their reputation as the graveyard of the Atlantic through centuries of maritime disasters that littered the ocean floor with hundreds of shipwrecks. By 2016, this treacherous stretch of coastline had become a mecca for technical divers seeking to explore some of the most historically significant wrecks in American waters. Marcus Lynn had established himself as one of California's most accomplished technical divers through a decade of exploring deep wrecks along the Pacific coast. The 29-year-old software engineer from San Francisco held advanced certifications in mixed gas diving, underwater navigation, and wreck penetration techniques, which enabled him to explore the interior spaces of sunken vessels safely. His methodical approach to dive planning had earned him respect within the technical diving community, though his friends occasionally questioned his willingness to accept increasingly dangerous challenges. The dare originated during a heated discussion at a dive shop in Hatteras Village, where Lynn had been preparing visiting divers from California for wreck dives. Local dive operator Captain Rex Morrison mentioned that few visiting divers possessed the skills necessary to penetrate the U-85, a German submarine sunk in 1942 that rested in 115 feet of water 28 miles offshore. When Morrison suggested that the wreck's cramped interior spaces and deteriorating structure made solo exploration inadvisable, Lynn immediately accepted the implied challenge. On August 17, 2016, Lynn convinced his regular dive partner, photographer Elena Vasquez, to accompany him on what he described as a routine wreck penetration dive. However, once they reached the U-85's resting place on the sandy bottom, Lynn revealed his intention to explore the submarine's interior alone, using minimal lighting equipment to simulate the methods of early wreck explorers who relied on primitive underwater torches. Vasquez strongly objected, arguing that solo penetration violated basic technical diving safety principles. Despite Vasquez's concerns, Lynn entered the submarine through a large breach in the pressure hull, carrying only a small primary light and a single backup illumination source. The U-85's interior had been transformed over 7 decades into a complex maze of collapsed bulkheads, tangled cables, and accumulated debris, creating numerous entanglement hazards. Marine growth covered every surface, while schools of fish had claimed various compartments as permanent homes. Navigation through the submarine's narrow corridors required Lynn to squeeze through openings barely wider than his body while dragging diving equipment behind him. The limited visibility provided by his single light meant he could only see a few feet ahead, forcing him to rely primarily on touch to navigate around obstacles and maintain his orientation within the wreck. His progress took him past the vessel's galley and crew quarters toward the forward torpedo room. The sand tiger shark that attacked Lynn had likely been using the submarine's interior as a resting place for months, taking advantage of the wreck's protected environment and abundant food sources. Sand tiger sharks, despite their fearsome appearance and protruding teeth, typically displayed docile behavior around human divers and rarely initiated unprovoked attacks. However, the confined space and Lynn's sudden appearance with bright lights had triggered a defensive response. The attack occurred as Lynn maneuvered through a particularly narrow passage between torpedo tubes and collapsed decking. The 8-foot sand tiger shark emerged from the shadows with surprising speed, its jaws clamping down on Lynn's right calf just above his diving fin. The shark's needle-sharp teeth penetrated his wetsuit and punctured multiple areas of muscle tissue, while Lynn struggled to understand what was happening in the confined, dimly lit space. Lynn's immediate reaction was to reach for his diving knife, but his position within the wreck's cramped confines prevented him from accessing the tool strapped to his left leg. The shark maintained its grip as Lynn thrashed against the interior structures, creating a cloud of sediment that reduced visibility to nearly zero. Old fishing nets and debris became entangled around both Lynn and the shark, creating a deadly trap that threatened to prevent escape. The struggle continued for nearly 2 minutes as Lynn fought simultaneously against the shark's grip and growing tangle of debris that threatened to pin him permanently within the submarine's interior. His air consumption increased dramatically due to physical exertion and stress, while blood from his wounds attracted other marine life within the wreck. Finally, through desperate kicks and manipulating his diving tank to strike the shark's head, Lynn convinced the predator to release its hold and retreat deeper into the submarine. Vasquez, monitoring Lynn's progress from outside the wreck, immediately recognized the emergency when she observed debris and blood emerging from the submarine's interior. She entered the breach point and followed Lynn's bubbles and guideline to his location, arriving as he began to escape from the entangled fishing nets. Her wreck penetration experience proved crucial as she helped guide Lynn through the submarine's maze-like interior while monitoring his air supply and physical condition. The ascent required careful decompression stops despite the medical emergency, as rapid ascent from 115 feet could have resulted in potentially fatal decompression sickness. Vasquez maintained close contact throughout the ascent process, monitoring Lynn's breathing and consciousness while preparing to initiate emergency procedures if his condition deteriorated. The controlled ascent took nearly 12 minutes, during which Lynn's bleeding continued and pain levels increased significantly. Emergency medical personnel were standing by at Hatteras Harbor when the dive boat returned, having been alerted by the captain's radio calls during the emergency ascent. Paramedics immediately began treating Lynn's multiple puncture wounds and deep lacerations while preparing him for transport to a trauma center. The wounds required extensive cleaning to remove embedded debris and potential bacteria before surgical repair could begin. Orthopedic surgeons at a medical center spent over 3 hours treating Lynn's injuries, which included muscle tears, tendon damage, and several deep puncture wounds that had narrowly missed major blood vessels. While Lynn eventually recovered full use of his leg after months of physical therapy, the incident effectively ended his interest in solo wreck penetration. It prompted him to become an advocate for conservative safety practices in technical diving. False Bay, situated along South Africa's Western Cape, had maintained its status as one of the world's premier shark diving destinations well into 2020, despite fluctuating great white populations that concerned marine biologists throughout the region. Marine enthusiast Ethan Clark had spent years planning his dream trip to experience cage diving with great white sharks in their natural habitat. The 42-year-old insurance adjuster from Manchester had developed his passion for marine life through countless hours watching nature documentaries and reading scientific publications about shark behavior and conservation efforts. Despite having limited diving experience, Clark had completed advanced swimming courses. He obtained basic scuba certifications specifically to prepare for this once-in-a-lifetime adventure that represented the culmination of his lifelong fascination with ocean predators. White Shark Adventures, operated by Captain Peter Kruger, has been conducting cage diving expeditions in False Bay for over 15 years, boasting an impressive safety record that includes thousands of successful dives without serious incidents. Kruger's operation utilized specially constructed steel cages designed to withstand the impact of large predatory sharks while providing tourists with unobstructed views of these magnificent creatures. The company's safety protocols included comprehensive briefings, experienced dive guides, and emergency procedures that had been refined through years of operating in some of the world's most challenging marine environments. On November 8, 2020, weather conditions appeared ideal for Clark's long-anticipated cage diving experience. The morning brought calm seas and clear skies, with underwater visibility extending over 50 feet and water temperatures remaining comfortable for extended diving operations. The expedition departed from Gansby Harbor, joined by Clark, who was accompanied by 5 other tourists, including marine biology student Anna Lindqvist from Sweden and retired physician Dr. Robert Chen from Vancouver, who shared Clark's enthusiasm for observing great white sharks in their natural environment. The boat anchored near Seal Island, approximately 3 miles offshore, where Captain Kruger's crew began deploying their standard chumming operation designed to attract great white sharks to the diving area. Within 20 minutes, the distinctive triangular dorsal fins of several large predators appeared around the vessel, including what marine biologist Dr. Sarah Townsend estimated to be a 14-foot great white that displayed the robust build and scarred hide characteristic of mature female specimens. The shark's behavior appeared typical for the species, showing curiosity about the boat while maintaining a respectful distance from the human activity. Clark descended into the aluminum cage alongside Lindqvist and Dr. Chen, his excitement barely contained as he observed his first live great white shark through the cage's reinforced viewing panels. The predator approached slowly, its movements displaying the fluid grace that had allowed this species to dominate marine ecosystems for millions of years. Underwater guide Tommy Mathembu monitored the group's air supplies while maintaining constant communication with the surface support team through a hardwired intercom system, which allowed for real-time coordination of the diving operation. The attack began when the great white suddenly accelerated toward the cage with explosive power, apparently triggered by the chumming operation or the diver's movements within the enclosure. The shark struck the cage's side panel with tremendous force, its massive head and jaws penetrating between 2 steel bars that had been weakened by years of exposure to corrosive saltwater. The impact bent the cage's framework, creating a gap large enough for the shark's head to enter the supposedly secure enclosure partially. Chaos erupted within the confined space as the 3 divers pressed themselves against the cage's far wall while the great white thrashed violently, trying to extract itself from the twisted metal that had trapped its head and shoulders. Clark found himself directly in the shark's path as it struggled to free itself, its massive tail striking the cage's rear panel with enough force to bend additional support structures. The shark's jaws snapped repeatedly as it fought against the metal bars, its teeth scraping against steel while its powerful muscles strained against the cage's compromised framework. During the shark's desperate attempts to escape, Clark's leg came into contact with the predator's open jaws as he tried to maneuver away from the thrashing animal. The great white's teeth closed reflexively around his calf, delivering a crushing bite that penetrated his wetsuit and inflicted deep puncture wounds in the muscle tissue. The bite lasted only seconds before the shark finally managed to extract itself from the damaged cage. Still, the brief contact was sufficient to cause significant injury and immediate blood loss that clouded the water within the enclosure. Captain Kruger and his crew reacted immediately to the emergency, activating winch systems to raise the damaged cage while monitoring the injured diver's condition through the intercom system. Clark remained conscious throughout the ascent, though he reported severe pain and visible blood loss that concerned both his fellow divers and the surface support team. The cage reached the surface within 90 seconds of the attack, allowing crew members to extract the injured tourist and begin emergency medical treatment while preparing for immediate evacuation to shore. Medical treatment began aboard the dive boat as crew members applied pressure bandages to Clark's wounds and administered pain medication during the high-speed transit back to Gansby Harbor. The puncture wounds, while not immediately life-threatening, required professional medical attention to prevent infection and address potential damage to muscle tissue and blood vessels. Emergency medical personnel were already waiting at the harbor when the boat arrived, having been alerted by Captain Kruger's radio calls during the return journey. Surgeons at a private medical facility in Hermanus spent over 2 hours cleaning and treating Clark's wounds, which included multiple deep puncture marks and tissue damage consistent with great white shark dentition patterns. While Clark avoided permanent disability, the injuries required several weeks of recovery time and extensive antibiotic treatment to prevent infection from marine bacteria. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of cage diving safety protocols and equipment maintenance procedures, with a particular focus on the structural integrity of steel cages subjected to repeated impacts from large predatory sharks. The attack generated significant media attention and renewed debates about the safety of commercial shark diving operations. However, marine biologists emphasized that such incidents remained extremely rare, given the thousands of cage dives conducted annually without incident. Clark eventually recovered from his injuries, but reported that the experience had fundamentally changed his relationship with marine wildlife, replacing his romantic notions about shark encounters with a profound respect for the unpredictable nature of apex predators in their natural environment. The Brisbane River system in Queensland, Australia, has experienced catastrophic flooding events throughout recorded history, with devastating inundations occurring roughly every decade, as heavy rainfall combined with high tides overwhelmed the region's drainage infrastructure. In March 2017, unprecedented rainfall associated with Tropical Cyclone Debbie caused the Brisbane River to rise rapidly beyond its banks, transforming suburban neighborhoods into temporary lakes filled with debris, displaced wildlife, and contaminated floodwater. Jake Turner had grown up along the banks of the Brisbane River in the suburb of Jindalee, where his family had operated a small marina and boat repair business for over 20 years. The 16-year-old high school student possessed extensive experience navigating the river system in various weather conditions, having spent countless hours kayaking, fishing, and exploring the waterways that defined his neighborhood's geography. His intimate knowledge of local currents, hidden obstacles, and safe passage routes made him an invaluable asset during emergencies, when professional rescue services became overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. On March 25, 2017, floodwaters had transformed Turner's familiar neighborhood into an alien landscape, where street signs barely protruded above the muddy surface and houses stood partially submerged like islands in a vast brown sea. Despite evacuation orders from local authorities, many elderly residents had refused to abandon their homes. They now found themselves stranded on rooftops or upper floors as the water levels continued to rise. Turner had volunteered to assist official rescue operations by using his knowledge of local geography to locate trapped residents in areas that larger rescue boats could not safely navigate. Turner launched his lightweight kayak from higher ground near his family's marina, carrying emergency supplies, including life jackets, bottled water, and first aid equipment, which had been donated by evacuated neighbors who had taken refuge in temporary shelters. His mission involved searching house to house through the flooded subdivision to locate residents who might need immediate assistance or evacuation to safety. The floodwater, contaminated with sewage, chemicals, and debris from damaged buildings, presented numerous health hazards, in addition to the obvious dangers of swift currents and hidden obstacles. The bull sharks that had entered the Brisbane River system represented one of the most significant dangers of the flooding event. However, this threat remained largely unrecognized by rescue personnel and volunteers working in the contaminated water. Bull sharks possess a unique physiological adaptation that allows them to survive in both saltwater and freshwater environments, enabling them to travel far upstream during flood events when normal territorial boundaries become meaningless. These aggressive predators, known for their unpredictable behavior and powerful bite force, had likely been displaced from their usual coastal habitats by the massive freshwater discharge flowing into Moreton Bay. Turner discovered the Nakamura family stranded on the roof of their single-story home approximately 2 miles downstream from his starting point, where rising water had trapped the elderly couple and their disabled adult son without means of evacuation. The family had been waiting for rescue for over 6 hours, during which time the floodwater had continued rising and their physical condition had deteriorated significantly. Turner maneuvered his kayak alongside their house and began the delicate process of helping the 3 family members into his small craft, which required multiple trips to transport everyone safely. During the second rescue trip, as Turner paddled through chest-deep floodwater while towing Mrs. Nakamura in an emergency flotation device, he felt a sudden, crushing impact against his lower right leg that sent waves of agony through his entire body. The bull shark, apparently attracted by the vibrations and splashing associated with the rescue operation, had struck without warning from the murky water below. Its powerful jaws closed around Turner's leg just above the ankle, delivering a bite force that fractured bones and severed muscle tissue. At the same time, The teenager fought to maintain his grip on both the kayak and Mrs. Nakamura's safety line. The attack lasted approximately 15 seconds as Turner thrashed desperately in the contaminated floodwater, his movements constrained by his need to prevent Mrs. Nakamura from being swept away by the current. The bull shark, apparently confused by the unfamiliar freshwater environment and unusual prey behavior, released its grip and disappeared back into the muddy depths, where its presence was concealed from potential observers. Turner's immediate priority involved getting Mrs. Nakamura to safety, despite his severe injury and the growing cloud of blood that marked their location in the flood zone. Fighting through excruciating pain and potential shock, Turner managed to guide Mrs. Nakamura to the relative safety of a partially submerged bus stop structure, where she could maintain her position above the waterline. He then activated an emergency whistle that he carried for attracting rescue personnel, creating a piercing signal that could be heard over the ambient noise of rushing water and emergency vehicles operating throughout the flood zone. His calls for help were answered within minutes by a state emergency service rescue team that had been working in the immediate area. Professional rescue personnel immediately recognized the severity of Turner's injuries and initiated emergency medical procedures while continuing the evacuation of the Nakamura family. The shark bite had created multiple deep puncture wounds and extensive tissue damage that required immediate professional medical attention to prevent blood loss and infection from the contaminated floodwater. Turner was evacuated by helicopter to a hospital, where trauma surgeons worked to repair the damage caused by the bull shark's attack. The surgical team spent over 4 hours treating Turner's injuries, which included fractured bones in his lower leg, severed muscle tissue, and deep puncture wounds that had been contaminated with debris and bacteria from the floodwater. While the teenager ultimately retained full use of his leg after extensive physical therapy, the recovery process required months of treatment and rehabilitation. The incident marked the first confirmed bull shark attack in the Brisbane River system during a flood event, prompting authorities to include shark awareness in future emergency response protocols. Turner's actions during the flood rescue earned him recognition from both local authorities and national media. However, he consistently emphasized that his primary concern had been helping his neighbors, rather than seeking personal recognition. The attack highlighted the complex and often unexpected dangers present during natural disasters, when displaced wildlife and human emergency responses created potentially deadly encounters in familiar environments that extraordinary circumstances had transformed.